much, ladies and gentlemen. That was Wednesday Night Hop, a tune written by Andy Kirk and Leslie Johannikins. And this opens our tribute to one of the greatest arrangers, pianists and composers in jazz, Mary Lou Williams. And we'll be focusing on her work with Andy Kirk's 12 Clouds of Joy, with whom she first came to prominence. It featured a cameo appearance by Rennie Hagman. Our thanks to Enrico Tommaso for supplying that arrangement for us to use. Thank you. Well, Mary Lou Williams was born Mary Elfrida Scruggs in Atlantic City, Georgia, 1910, although that might have been an earlier date. There's no records to support that date. Around 1915 she moved to Pittsburgh, which of course was a great breeding ground for jazz pianists. Errol Garner came from there, Ahmed Jamal, Billy Strayhorn, Dodo Marmarosa, Earl Hines of course. Mary Lou was a child prodigy. She had perfect pitch. She started playing at the age of 4 on the harmonium that her mother played at the local Baptist church. And she also claimed to have psychic powers. And she said this proved useful later on when she was accompanying other musicians and she could guess what note was coming out. She learned to reproduce things accurately by ear from the pianola, including the classics and tenor rolls by General Morton and Fats Waller. As a young girl, very young girl, she helped support her family by playing for tips at the neighbours' houses and for more serious money with the wealthy white folks' places, and she accompanied silent films, and she even worked in the local brothel. Early teens, she was in vaudeville, gaining valuable experience in show business. Her feature number with Buzzing Harris and his Hits and Bits involved spreading a sheet over the piano keyboard and playing Marlinburg Joys with her elbows. It was with Buzzing Harris troupe that she met her first husband, the saxophonist John Williams, and together they went on to work with the Top Dance Act, Seymour and Jeanette. And it was with Jeanette James that Mary Lou made her first recording as Mary Leo Burley. Now, Burley was the name of her stepfather, and Leo was a misprint. She was just 17, and already she was comparable with James P. Johnson and Earl Hines. In 1928, John Williams joined Terence T. Holder's Dark Clouds of Joy, a territory band based in Oklahoma. And it was run as a cooperative, so when Holder gambled away the Christmas payroll, they voted him out, and Andy Kirk, the baritone sax player and bass player, became the leader, and John Williams became the like the straw boss and the manager and handled the finances of the band. Anyway, we'll interrupt this fascinating discourse with another number, and it's one of our earliest arrangements, the Corky Stomp, recorded in 1929, and Corky was a character in the long-running Gasoline Alley comic strip that was syndicated in various American newspapers. At the time, Mary Lou couldn't read or write music, so she dictated all the arrangements to Andy Kirk. And Andy claimed to have written part of Corky Stomp. It was often said of Mary Lou that she played the piano with a heavy touch, just like a man, and you can certainly hear it in this solo, which is a fistful of notes. Yes. I sent a copy to Keith Nichols, and he's, he was quite surprised as well. Yeah, so I've got my work cut out on this one.
1, 2, 3.
she updated that number in the swing era, so it's a great tune. Lovely solo there by Alistair Allen there. Our next number happens to be Mary Lou's first composition, Messa Stomp. Messie was the nickname bestowed upon her by her maternal grandfather. Mary Lou had the luxury of trying out her arrangements at rehearsals, and the band was prepared to give her a chance to experiment and develop her skills because they were always on the lookout and happy to have new material to play. Later on she learnt theory from Don Redman, Edgar Sampson, Milton Orant and Will Bradley, and Redman was the model for her early arrangements. Eventually she was writing about 5 or 6 charts a week, for which she got paid the handsome sum of between $5 and $10 by the recording companies. Yes, tut. The 12 Clouds of Joy were auditioned by Brunswick and Vocalion Records in 1929 and landed a recording contract very much on the strength of Mary Lou's playing. She had merely been sitting in for the regular pianist Marian Jackson, a notable womanizer and drinker who failed to show up for the session, and Kirk thought it was only fair that as Mary Lou played on the audition that she should be on the record. Brunswick's producer Jack Capp had been keen for her to become a permanent fixture because the band didn't sound as good without her, but that didn't happen until sometime later. Anyway, we're indebted to Klaus Jacobi for this arrangement, which came by our good friend Keith Nichols, and it's, of course, Messa Stomp. Hello? Yes, here I am. Yeah, thank you. Messer Stomp, lovely clarinet playing there from Stefan. Stefan's a lot. And a cameo banjo solo from Tom Spassler. The Clouds recording contract ended with the Great Depression, and it was another 5 years before they were in the studios again. And posterity has missed the contributions of Ben Webster, Lester Young, and Buddy Tate, who variously occupied the tender chair during that period. In 1935, Jack Cap left Brunswick Records and bought the rights to the English-owned Decca label. And in 1936, the Clouds of Joy recorded 13 sides for him, and these established Mary Lou Williams in the forefront of jazz composers. For her arrangements, rather than the $75 she was due, she was paid in silk stockings and dresses. Well, yeah, not bad. As we're hearing the next number, it was a smoother and tighter band than the one that recorded in 1929. Andy Kirk's lumbering sousaphone, sorry, Michael, had been replaced by the fine bass playing of Booker Collins. And in the front line, there was an outstanding soloist in the tenor, saxophonist Dick Wilson, a hard-drinking, handsome lady killer. Well, Gunther Schuller said of his... Man for the job, it is. Gunther Schuller said of his playing, his lines were sinuous and unpredictable. His tone was at once imbued with a searing old-style intensity and a subtle modern coolness. He might be better remembered today, apart from the fact that his career was cut tragically short by tuberculosis. He died in 1941 and he was just 30 years old. Other band members contributed to the arrangements, notably the trumpeter Earl Thompson, but it was Mary Lou who kind of gave the band its overall conception, very much as did Duke Ellington with his own orchestra. This is reflected in the title of our next piece, which features a vocal by Enrico Tommaso. It's called The Lady Who Swings the Band. You'll have to use your imagination here. Yes. I've got the stockings on under the trousers. The original vocalist was Harry Mills, who sounded remarkably like Mary Lou Williams' friend Jack Teagarden. The song was written by Sammy Kahn and Saul Chaplin, who had a hand in writing Until the Real Thing Comes Along, which was a big hit for the Kirk Band in 1937. We'd also like to welcome to the bandstand Franz Sostrom. Several of the reed players in the Clouds doubled on baritone sax, so Franz is going to play much higher up in his register than is accustomed, so I'll be wearing the tight trousers. So here we go, The Lady Who Swings the Band. A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3.
Out the city, there's a pretty gal named Mary Lou, and she plays the piano in a manner that is all too new. Here of late, she's playing with the band. Let me tell you all this, baby, at the baby grand. When you hear her on trombone, with the power behind the bow. It's the lady who swings the band. When you hear the saxes ride, who's the reason why they glide? It's the lady who swings the band. When the rhythm section gives you direction, the lady at the crease is the main attraction. Who makes dancers on the floor beat their fill and yell for more? It's the lady who swings the band. the lady who swings a, she's the lady who swings a band. She's the lady who swings a band.
There we go. Yes. There's our gender issues here. Yes. It's rather confusing because, you know, Mary Lou Williams replaced Marion Jackson, the band, who was actually a bloke. The singer was called Faye Terrell, he was a bloke. Replaced by June Richmond, another vocalist. I don't know whether that was a man or a woman. Someone answering on a postcard thing. It's all very confusing. Yeah. The other day I was Lovey Austin. I don't know, you know. But I should have had the op before I got there. Anyway, early in her career, Mary Lou Williams met several musicians who influenced her musical thinking. Her brother-in-law would escort her to concerts and theatre shows, and it was in a theatre that she saw the legendary Lovey Austin. Now, Mike told this anecdote the other night as being a little Hardin, but I think it was Mary Lou that actually saw Lovely Austin sitting in a pit, she said, with 4 or 5 male musicians with her legs crossed, cigarette in her mouth, playing the show with her left hand and writing music in her right hand for the next act to come on stage. In 1981, Mary Lou said that her proudest accomplishment was actually being able to write and play the piano at the same time. So a Pittsburgh pianist by the name of Jack Howard encouraged her to work on her left hand and showed her how to use broken tenths. When Hicks and Bits, the troupe, were in Chicago in 1925, Mary Lou became reacquainted with Earl Hines, who she'd known in Pittsburgh, and was a major influence on her. He in turn introduced her to Ford Buck Washington, later become part of the famous vaudeville team Buck and Bubbles. And he showed her his prize run, but he said to Mary Lou, play it backwards, because if Art Tatum's in the room, I don't want him stealing it. But he stole it anyway, of course. Now, when she was in Chicago, still around about 1926, she played her favourite Jelly Roll Morton piece, The Pearls, to the composer, who immediately sat down, sat down and showed her how to phrase it. And then she played him one of her own compositions. That didn't make any difference. He showed her how to phrase that as well. In 1931, she was in Philadelphia, where she was given piano playing advice by Eddie Hayward Sr. and Pearl Wright, who was Ethel Waters' accompanist. And Ethel Waters later pleaded with Mary Lou to join her on tour, but of course she was with Andy Kirk and didn't want to do that. She heard Count Basie at the Subway Club on 12th Street in Kansas City and emulated the way that he would push the band from the piano. And he remarked of her prowess at jam sessions, and he said if they were looking for somebody who could play in all of those badass keys Hawk was playing, Mary Lou was the one to get. And around 1930 she met Pete Johnson. Now he was reputed to be the best pianist in Kansas City, but when he heard her, he said, I've never heard so much piano played by a woman and very few men. I did not feel so big after that. So she was much admired. Gutzler Schuller said of her that she was not an originator, but a first-class assimilator. An exceptionally high degree of eclecticism marks her entire career. She was unique in that her playing spanned the whole history of jazz, really, from spirituals and blues. She went through stride, swing, she embraced bebop, she even played modal jazz, and she recorded a duet with Cecil Taylor, the avant-garde pianist. So a remarkable lady. Now, all this preamble leads to a trio number recorded in 1936 with colleagues from the Andy Kirk Orchestra, Booker Collins on bass, and the gifted drummer Ben Thigpen, and we have the equally gifted Richard Pite and Malcolm Sked tonight. And, actually, when Mike asked me to arrange this show, this was kind of sort of a reason I was rather keen, because I heard this piece played in Humphrey Littleton's programme in my teens, and it knocked me out, and I thought one day I'd like to play that, and here we are. So it's called Corny Rhythm, but I can detect nothing corny about it. Right, thank you very much. Oh, well, that was the world premiere for me on that. Right, so now putting things in context, it's been suggested that Mary Lou Williams didn't really set the style for the Clouds of Joy, but just the majority of the 25 jazz-based recordings that are constantly reissued. Well, whatever, her method of writing was akin to Duke Ellington. She would work away from the piano, try her arrangement out on the band, and if it didn't work, then she'd go away and rewrite it. Sometimes in the 1930s, the guys would laugh at her more audacious harmonic experiments, but she had a particular talent for notating jazz rhythms in a way to make the music swing. And she developed into one of the most sought-after arrangements in the swing era. She had commissions from Gus Arnhem, Glenn Gray, the Dorsey Brothers, Bob Crosby, Cab Calloway, Earl Hines, Louis Armstrong. She wrote the theme song for Benny Goodman's radio show, sponsored by Camel cigarettes, Camel Hop it was called. And for Goodman she also wrote Roll 'em, a tribute to Pete Johnson. That became a big hit, and that didn't go down very well with Andy Kirk, of course. She was supposed to be writing hits for him, not for Benny. When Teddy Wilson left Benny Goodman's quartet, Mary Lou was offered the chair there, but she didn't want to leave the Kirk band. She even arranged for Duke Ellington and Trumpets No End, a piece based on Irving Berlin's Blue Skies, became a staple in his repertoire. Another parallel with Ellington was the way she'd composed tunes based on phrases she'd heard played by the musicians in the band. And the next piece, Walking and Swinging, is a case in point. The melody was inspired by the popular song The Moon is Low, and it's likely there was a contribution from Mary's lover at the time, Ben Webster. Her husband John would drive her over to Webster's house to work on this tune. It was quite an open relationship. And the second chorus is interesting, that it was scored for 3 saxophones, and the 4th lead voice is for a muted trumpet. And this was done in the days when they only had 3 saxophones in the band, and it was quite popular with musicians, this effect. Aficionados will note a phrase in the second chorus that gave rise to Thelonious Monk's tune Rhythmaning. In 1940 she arranged Walking and Swinging for Les Brown's orchestra and Gene Krupa's orchestra. Okay, right, without further ado, we'll play it. Thank you. Walking and Swinging. And our next selection happens to be the theme song of Andy Kirk's 12 Clouds of Joy, a thing called Cloudy, and it was composed by Mary Lou Williams with a co-composer credit to her husband John Williams. It was recorded 3rd of April 1936 and bears little resemblance to the Cloudy that was recorded by the band in 1929. Now we have some salacious detail for you. By all accounts, Mary Lou's marriage to John was a loveless one, although he was protective of her, and he could be, she alleged, physically abusive. He would also gamble away her earnings, but where she was concerned, he was quite tight with money. So both had extramarital relationships before they divorced in 1942. Mary Lou had affairs with, well, first of all, the best friend of John Williams in the band, John Harrington, the clarinet player, and he was superseded by Ben Webster, and then the saxophonist Earl Miller, and then she had a fling with Don Byas, another great player. She was an attractive woman whose admirers included Jack Teagarden, who proposed marriage to her. Mary Lou was drawn to great musicians, and her second husband was the trumpet player Harold Shorty Baker, who joined the Clouds in 1940. 2 years later went on tour for 8 years with Duke Ellington, and that effectively put play to that relationship. But interestingly, they never divorced, and much later Mary Lou had a relationship with David Stone Martin, who you may know as the wonderful artist who did a lot of jazz album covers. Returning to this piece, Cloudy, this will feature a vocal, again, by Enrico Tommaso, originally sung by Faye Terrell, and he was discovered by Andy Kirk working as a bouncer in a Kansas City club run by gangsters. He was the first black crooner who was widely popular with white audiences, and it was he, around 1937, that turned Mary Lou Williams onto marijuana. And it was one night they were travelling through Texas, and they smoked some particularly strong pot, and they spent the whole night sitting on tombstones. Dick Wilson, the sax player, Faye Terrell and Mary Lou, they couldn't move, they were so stoned. Anyway, we'd also like to welcome to the bandstand the lovely Emma Fisk. She's going to play the part of Claude Fiddler Williams, no relation to John Williams. Claude Fiddler Williams was inspired to play the violin after hearing Joe Venuti. He was also a guitar player and joined Count Basie in 1936 and was voted Guitarist of the Year in Downbeat's Readers' Poll. He died in Kansas City in 2004, aged 96. There we are, so it was good for you, this friend of mine. As is inaudible on most of the recordings of the band, I've added a part or two in the following arrangements for Emma to play. So. One, two, three.
Days are cloudy, nights are cloudy, since you went away. Bring down heartaches and scream heartache, I can't go on this way. Things are cloudy, oh so cloudy, missing, I've been missing to drive those clouds away.
Thank you. Cloudy, wonderful tenor solo in the Dick Wilson manner by Matthias there. Strandy violin from Emma Fisk. Now, Mary Lou had several protégés among the younger set of pianists who came into her apartment to practice and compose on the piano. It was there that Errol Garner allegedly developed his unique style, where his left hand would play that 4/4 beat in the manner of a guitar. He was also from Pittsburgh, and he'd attended Mary Lou's alma mater, Westinghouse School, and until she set him straight, he'd been an Art Tatum copyist. And she said, you know, you're on a hiding to nothing doing that. So he got his act together and became the great pianist that we know today. With Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell, she would rehearse 6 hands at the keyboard. Powell was smitten and called her baby doll. And when he played for her, she would try and work on his left hand, and she would tap his left hand with a ruler. He said, left hand, left hand. And apparently, well, she alleged that Powell dedicated his composition Tempus Fugit to her. She also instructed Powell and Monk in the art of touch. Some of Monk's tunes for phrases originated from Mary Lou, where we've already heard the walking and swinging, which became rhythm-a-ning. The bass line of the 52nd Street theme is straight out of her piece Scorpio, and Monk's Hackensack refers to her 1944 reworking of Lady Be Good via Hawkins' version Riptide. And Powell developed some of Mary Lou's licks in his piece Un Poco Loco. Of course, she seldom received any credit for her innovations. In turn, she was influenced by her students and made her first out-and-out pop recording in 1947. And in 1951, she recorded several tunes by another protégé, Herbie Nichols. After she left the Clouds of Joy in 1942, Mary Lou formed a small combo with her husband, the trumpeter Harold Shorty Baker, and the drummer was the young Art Blakey, of whom she said he was born bopping. And Tad Dameron heard the band and contributed several arrangements for them to try. This brings us to a piece composed by another young Turk of the day, a man who recorded with Chu Berry, and then later Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie before his tragic death in 1945, aged 35. This was Clyde Hart, and Mary Lou's arrangement of Puddinghead Serenade departs from the usual style of the band. The critic Charles Fox described it as sounding a bit like Benny Carter's Lonesome Nights might have done had Don Redman rearranged it. So I rather like it. Right, it's time for another piano trio from the session March 36, reworking of Mary Lou's 1929 piece Froggy Bottom, which she retitled Overhand. The idea came from a little town she passed through on her travels, where she said fancifully folks just sank down to the bottom of things like frogs in a pool, leading a carefree life. Apart from the influence of Johnson, Waller and Hines, Mary Lou was an accomplished player of the blues, and we can hear touches of Count Basie in her performance of this number. Other pianists in Kansas City that influenced Mary Lou included Julia Lee and Jay McShann. Kansas City had a good time atmosphere, barely affected by the Depression, and was less class and colour conscious. And I think Mary Lou kind of thrived in the atmosphere, and it was there that she really found herself as an artist. The erudite Gunther Schuller wrote that Mary Lou Williams took Boogie Woogie with its murky and sombre primitive visions and gave it a more cheerful, lacy legato touch. So here's Overhand with Malcolm and Richard. In 1937, the Clouds of Joy had a hit record with Until the Real Thing Comes Along, featuring a vocal by Faye Terrell, which led a move away from jazz towards a more commercial repertoire. In a clandestine deal with Andy Kirk, Joe Glazer became the manager or half owner of the band, and that ended its cooperative nature, much to the anger of the rest of the members of the band. Glazer put Mary Lou and Dick Williams on separate contracts, and they got more money as star soloists, even though that their contributions were becoming marginalised by the new commercial policy. Mary Lou eventually lost interest, and she'd sit at the piano playing minimally, or she turned her solos over to the new star guitarist Floyd Smith, and she'd sit there doing the crossword, or she'd be falling asleep. Sometimes she'd just disappear for days at a time. In the preface of the Peter Morris folio of Mary Lou Williams' piano solos, published in 1940, it refers to her with political incorrectness as that dusky arranger. It also calls Andy Kirk her great friend. Well, in truth, that was never the case. They respected one another, but it was Kirk who showed her how to arrange and transpose for the different instruments and how to voice the horns. But his ambition was to be the black Guy Lombardo in a sweet orchestra, and of course Mary Lou Williams, all she wanted to do was play jazz. So by the end of her time with the band, they weren't even on speaking terms. So there was plenty of prestigious work after their hit record, but Joe Glazer was skimming money off the top of the band's fees. And the last straw came when Mary Lou found out that her royalties were being divided with two other people. So one night in Washington, D.C. in 1942, disgusted with the state of the piano and the direction the band was taking, she just walked off the stage and went home to Pittsburgh. Anyway, let's not end on a down note. Here's a tune by the co-composers of Until the Real Thing Comes Along, Saul Chaplin and Sammy Callum, recorded in December 1936 in the jazz heyday of the Andy Kirk Clouds of Joy. And it's a tune entitled 52nd Street. And to sing the vocal refrain, we have someone guaranteed to lift the spirits. It's Cécile Savon.
A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. The new Clouds of Joy.